Welcome to African Folktales by Tammy. Please don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more interesting stories. Also share this story to someone who might be interested. Let's get into the story. Brindle Heights carried an air of exclusivity that drew only a certain class of people, the influential, the loud with wealth, and those desperate to be seen in their orbit. Tucked between quiet boulevards and gates with names engraved in gold was a new home stirring whispers. A luxurious white brick mansion with tall glass windows and a black marble fountain at the center of its courtyard now had a new occupant, Mary Grant. She wasn't from wealth, but she moved like someone who'd always had it. Her heels echoed against the marble tiles, and her voice often rang louder than the wind chimes at the entrance. Social media was where she reigned. Every hallway selfie, every brunch plate she photographed, every robe-wrapped morning she filmed herself greeting her followers, came with the subtle flecks of her environment. But what none of them knew, not even those closest to her online circle, was that the mansion was not hers. It didn't belong to her new man Josh either. But in every caption Mary called it our new haven, and in every reel she paraded it like a badge of conquest. To her, possession didn't require ownership. It only needed confidence and an audience willing to believe the dream. From the sparkling chandelier shots to the private poolside evenings she curated, Mary mastered illusion, and in a world where likes spoke louder than truth, illusion was all she needed. Josh Walters knew how to blend charm with ambiguity. He let Mary have her way because for now it served a greater purpose. He liked comfort, and more importantly, he liked to win. After leaving Cynthia, his longtime partner, who had funded most of his lifestyle and invested in his failed ventures, Josh had drifted conveniently into Mary's arms. She was adoring, playful, and above all, eager to be part of something bigger. He had met her at Cynthia's wellness spa, a naive receptionist then, always curious, always wide-eyed. Now here she was with faux fur coats hanging in Cynthia's walk-in closet, stepping on imported rugs Cynthia handpicked, and sipping wine on the very balcony where Cynthia once imagined hosting book clubs. Josh had kept silent about the property's real ownership. He convinced Mary it was a transfer in progress, that papers took time, and Cynthia had moved on and wouldn't be returning. With each week that passed, Mary's certainty grew. She redecorated, she rearranged. She even invited a real estate agent once to admire the changes she made. All Josh did was watch with a smile, ensuring the illusion lived longer than the truth. He knew Cynthia wasn't the kind to cause a scene, and that belief emboldened him. In his mind, silence meant surrender. And with that flawed logic, he built a castle out of someone else's sacrifice, hoping no storm would come to test its foundation. To the outside world, they were a couple goals. Mary wore matching silk pajamas with Josh and documented their mornings from bed. The kitchen, with its granite tops and underlit cabinets, became the backdrop for her smoothie routines. They filmed dance challenges in the living room, hosted candlelit dinners in the garden, and posted staged arguments for relationship talk content. Followers praised their bond, influencers gushed over Mary's rise, and fan pages reposted her reels with captions like Manifestation Queen. But beneath the curated angles and bright filters was a secret Mary never questioned. It never occurred to her to ask for ownership documents or to look into the history of the house. She was too busy living the dream. Josh had told her Cynthia left without drama, and Mary believed him. After all, who would abandon such beauty if not by choice? What Mary failed to notice was the little signs Cynthia left behind: a hidden drawer with monogrammed towels, a faint scent in the guest room, a forgotten jewelry case under the dresser. But Mary was too blinded by her new life to see the shadows that didn't belong to her. Every reel she posted layered on a narrative that was slowly unraveling. Still, she carried on, convinced she'd won something, never suspecting that what she had mistaken for a victory was just a borrowed stage in someone else's unfinished story. Cynthia Kingsley had always been methodical. She never made noise about her investments, never felt the need to prove anything. Her silence was often mistaken for softness, but those who truly knew her understood she was calculated, not passive. After her mother passed and left her the sizable inheritance, Cynthia poured herself into building a life she could be proud of. That house in Brindle Heights had been a dream realized after years of quiet hustling, strategic property moves, and expanding her skincare empire. When she met Josh, she believed she had found a partner, not a project. But love made her blind to his laziness, his quiet entitlement, and his growing dependency. He was charming, yes, always saying the right things, always there with praise, but he never gave as much as he took. And when he left, no fights, no explanation, just a text that said, "We need space." She assumed he needed time to grow. What she never expected was for him to move into her home with someone else. The betrayal wasn't in his departure. It was in the audacity to occupy her space like she never existed. And Cynthia, though quiet and calm, wasn't one to be erased without response. She just believed in moving silently until it was time to make noise that echoed in actions, not words. Willow Creek was nothing like Brindle Heights. It didn't boast glossy mansions or gated lawns. It breathed simplicity. The streets were narrow and lined with aged trees that bowed gently with the wind. Here people moved slower, spoke softer, and rarely asked questions about a person's past unless invited to. It was the kind of place where Cynthia Kingsley could disappear without drawing attention, where she could reconstruct herself quietly after having her heart broken and her dignity bruised. She rented a modest home tucked at the end of a cul-de-sac, not far from the edge of town, where a river hummed softly through the evenings. The house had no grandeur, no history, just plain walls and enough space to think. Cynthia had traded marble floors for hardwood creaks, chandeliers for ceiling fans, and yet she found a strange sense of peace here. The silence wasn't heavy, it was healing. Each morning she brewed her tea and sat by the window, watching the fog lift from the trees. She had started her skincare line again from scratch, small batches, sold online, packaged with handwritten notes. There were no viral campaigns, no influencers, no grand openings. Just authenticity. She didn't need noise anymore. The betrayal had carved something deep inside her, and she wasn't in a rush to fill that space with distractions. It was in this quiet corner of the world that she slowly began to unlearn her guilt, her self-doubt, and the poisonous idea that maybe she had deserved to be abandoned. The breakup hadn't come with a fight. There were no slammed doors, no raised voices, just one message on a rainy Thursday afternoon. Cynthia had been at the warehouse inspecting product samples when Josh's name popped up on her phone. A simple line, "I need time to find myself. Please don't make this harder." That was it. No conversation, no closure. At first, she thought he'd return a few days, maybe a week, the way people pull away and come back when emotions settle. But days turned into weeks, and there was only silence. No calls, no explanations, just distance. And with each day, Cynthia found herself spiraling between confusion and pain. Had she missed a sign? Had she pushed too hard? Was she too successful, too independent, too much of something he couldn't handle? The questions burned deeper than the betrayal itself. But instead of chasing answers, she let the silence stand. She blocked his number, archived their pictures, and packed away the memories in a box she never opened again. What hurt the most wasn't losing him, it was realizing that someone she had loved, trusted, and built with could walk away without a second thought, leaving her to dismantle the dreams they had once shared. She didn't scream, she didn't beg, and she didn't ask why. Cynthia had never believed in begging anyone to stay. If someone could walk away from her, then they never truly belonged in her story. She wasn't even thinking of the house in Brindle Heights anymore. After Josh left, the property had become a symbol of pain. Every tile, every window pane, every curtain reminded her of the life they were supposed to build together. She had stepped away from it deliberately. The house was placed under limited access with her lawyer. Renovations were paused. She had planned to eventually rent it out or maybe sell it. But in the thick of healing, she hadn't checked on it. Months passed before a friend sent her a message late one evening, attaching a reel from Instagram. The video loaded slowly. It was Mary flashing her dazzling smile, walking barefoot through her kitchen. Cynthia stared. The cabinets had been painted white. The countertops had vases. A dog barked in the background. Mary panned the camera toward the living room where Josh lounged casually on the sofa, waving at the camera with a smug grin. The caption read, "A peaceful New Haven, grateful doesn't even cut it." Cynthia didn't blink. Her phone dropped to the table, but her heart remained still. It wasn't just that they were inside her house. It was the audacity, the boldness to flaunt what was stolen. Mary had no idea, but the plate she ate from, the couch she curled on, the art on the wall, all were Cynthia's choices, Cynthia's money, Cynthia's legacy. She felt her stomach twist, not from pain, but from something deeper. Not rage, not tears, just a strange steady burn that spread through her chest. She didn't need to ask how, she already knew. That night she didn't cry, she didn't call anyone. She didn't react online. Cynthia sat on her porch, legs tucked beneath her, eyes fixed on the stars above the quiet Willow Creek. There was no plan yet, no strategy. Just the certainty that what had been taken would be returned. She wasn't driven by vengeance. She wasn't going to create a scandal. Cynthia believed in order, in structure, in truth. But she also knew how the world worked. A woman wronged is often told to be silent, to move on, to rise above. But Cynthia wasn't interested in appearing graceful for the sake of public perception. She had spent too many years building her life from nothing to let someone like Mary turn it into a prop for vanity. Her silence had been a gift, a chance for them to step away respectfully. But now it has become mistaken for weakness. That was the mistake. Josh had underestimated the woman who once put everything on hold to help him stand. Mary had mocked a legacy she didn't understand. Cynthia rose from her chair that evening with a quiet, focused breath. She didn't need to shout. She didn't need to boast. She only needed to act, because she didn't come from the noise. She came from substance. And substance has a way of reclaiming everything it owns without begging for applause. Mary stood in front of her ring light, adjusting the angle of her phone camera, the same way she had done every morning for weeks. Her silk robe shimmered under the natural sunlight streaming in through the tall windows, and her perfectly laid frontal wig was slicked to perfection. "Good morning, my darlings," she chirped into the phone with the poise of someone who had convinced herself she was born for the spotlight. Behind her, the soft clinking sound of a coffee machine echoed, and Josh's voice chimed in off-camera, adding charm to the performance. The kitchen had become her favorite place to film. Its marble countertops, golden fixtures, and subtle lighting created the kind of ambience she knew her followers craved. Mary wasn't just showing a home, she was curating an illusion of luxury, success, and love. She often tilted the camera to catch glimpses of the high ceilings and expensive art, all while talking about her latest skincare routine or the importance of self-care. Yet behind her curated posts, there was not a single moment of reflection about how she came to possess this lifestyle. She didn't ask where the deeds were, never wondered why Josh never took business calls or paid for utilities. She was high on illusion, and the world she had crafted for herself online was too intoxicating to question. Each day she grew more attached to the mansion and more convinced she had arrived. Her followers, numbering in the thousands now, fed her validation, and she in turn fed them lies wrapped in glossy filters. Josh had become something of an accessory in Mary's world. Once the man with smooth words and strategic silence, he now found comfort in letting Mary become the face of their curated paradise. While she flaunted smiles and sun-drenched mornings, Josh remained in the background, an occasional laugh, a blurred figure passing in a video, a hand placed a mimosa beside her. He had learned the power of disappearing within the noise. But his silence wasn't passive, it was tactical. He knew Cynthia wouldn't stay quiet forever. Yet he gambled on the hope that her silence meant surrender. It was easier to believe she had moved on than to imagine the storm she could bring. He watched as Mary gave virtual tours of the mansion to her audience, introducing them to their living room, their fireplace, their home office where Josh worked from home. And yet he never once corrected her. He never mentioned that Cynthia's name was still on every legal document. Instead, he rehearsed lines in his head just in case, excuses that sounded sincere, lies dressed in partial truth, justifications polished enough to sound like misunderstandings. He had built an entire narrative in his mind, one where he was the victim of a messy breakup, where Cynthia had abandoned the house, and where Mary and he were simply taking advantage of an empty space. The longer he clung to that version of the truth, the more confident he felt playing house in someone else's dream. The online world watched with growing curiosity as Mary's content became increasingly lavish. She filmed unboxing videos in the master bedroom, hosted girls' nights with champagne on the terrace, and even teased a skincare line launch that she claimed was inspired by peace and blessings. Her audacity grew alongside her following. She took selfies in the bathtub Cynthia, once designed for quiet nights, used the reading nook as her podcast corner, and rebranded the library as a creative corner for powerful thoughts. Then came the post that changed everything. One evening, dressed in a flowing green satin gown and dripping in borrowed jewelry, Mary stood in front of the mansion's tall glass doors and told a story. "When Josh and I found this house," she said into the camera, "it was owned by an older woman who couldn't keep up with the cost. She was sweet, but it was time for her to let go." She smiled softly, feigning humility. "Now it's our sanctuary, a place where we found love and peace." That video spread quickly. Her tone, her wording, the casual dismissal of a woman she never met. Cynthia's friends saw it. Her lawyer saw it. And by the time it landed on Cynthia's screen, it was already too late to pretend it didn't matter. Mary had crossed the final line. The mansion wasn't just a backdrop anymore. It had become a symbol of mockery. And Cynthia, watching it unfold in the quiet of Willow Creek, felt her stillness fracture not from pain, but from purpose. Something had been activated in her. Not revenge, not rage, but clarity. Mary had mistaken grace for absence. That was the last mistake she would make. In Brindle Heights, the neighbors had started to whisper. At first, it was small talk. They noticed Mary's constant filming, her flamboyant parties, her need to be seen. A few longtime residents recognized the house. "Wasn't this Cynthia Kingsley's place?" they would murmur, confused. Some recalled how Cynthia used to host charity dinners and wellness retreats, nothing loud or boastful. But this new occupant had a different energy. Delivery trucks arrived daily. Music played into the night. Photographers came and went, yet no sale sign had ever been posted. No official move-in had been observed. Just a shift in energy, one that felt off. Among the whispers was an elderly neighbor named Mrs. Older, who had once been Cynthia's friend. She watched from her balcony, clutching her teacup tighter each day. When Mary's video went viral and the local news blog reposted it with the caption, "Socialite Stunning Mansion Transformation," Mrs. Alder made a call. That call traveled from Brill Heights to Willow Creek, and with that call the air shifted. Cynthia didn't react with fireworks or noise. She simply closed her laptop, folded her hands over her lap, and stared ahead with a gaze sharper than steel. The world didn't see it yet, but the real owner was stirring. And when she moved, she wouldn't need to announce it. Her steps would speak for her. The house that had become a stage for lies was about to be reclaimed, not with hashtags, not with drama, but with the kind of silence that makes the guilty tremble and the truth rise to the surface like dawn through fog. The driveway hadn't changed. The long stretch of interlocked stones, framed by hibiscus shrubs Cynthia had planted years ago, still curved gently toward the front steps of the mansion. As Cynthia stepped out of the sedan, the scent of the gardenias rising from the corner flower bed greeted her like an old friend. The air was heavier here, charged with memories, some pleasant, others bitter. She adjusted her sunglasses, not to hide her eyes from the sun, but to hide the way they lingered too long on the place she once called home. Dressed in a simple fitted black dress with block-heeled pumps and a leather folder in hand, she didn't need to announce her presence. Her poise did that for her. She walked up the stairs with measured steps, each one echoing with a kind of finality. The front door, still adorned with the brass knocker she had imported from Morocco, was answered by one of the housekeepers, an older woman named Elsie, who gasped softly upon seeing her. "Miss Kingsley," she whispered, blinking back shock. Cynthia offered only a slight nod, her lips forming a tight but calm smile. Elsie stepped aside immediately, no questions asked. Inside the mansion, the air smelled different. Someone else's perfume had invaded her home. Cynthia didn't flinch. She moved through the space like a woman reacquainting herself with a memory that had refused to die. The living room had been rearranged. The custom-made sofa she once adored had been pushed closer to the fireplace. Her favorite painting of a stormy Lagos beach had been taken down, replaced by a gaudy, abstract canvas that clashed with the soft cream tones of the walls. Cynthia stood in the center of the room and turned slowly, observing the details. The new rug was flashy and lacked soul. The crystals hanging from the chandelier above were dusty. She spotted her antique clock still perched in the corner, its ticking unbothered by the chaos it had witnessed. Cynthia's gaze didn't tremble. She walked toward the shelf near the hallway, opened the bottom drawer, and retrieved a velvet box. Inside it were monogrammed napkin rings and a sealed envelope, documents she had stored away personally. They were still there, untouched, proof that this was still her domain, no matter what the world believed. She moved to the study, where a whiteboard now stood in the middle of the room, filled with what looked like Mary's half-baked business plans, doodles and slogans that made no sense to her. But Cynthia didn't touch a thing. She didn't need to. Her presence was her statement. She passed the guest room and lingered a second too long in the hallway, where she and Josh once argued over what shade of curtains would match the furniture. There were dents on the wall now, careless scrapes and scuffs that hadn't been there before. It wasn't just trespass, it was desecration. Still, she carried no anger on her face. She simply walked with grace, with memory in her steps, reclaiming every inch of what had been stolen. Mary wasn't home. That was a blessing. Cynthia didn't need drama. She didn't need a confrontation filled with shrill voices and defensive lies. She was here for clarity, to reawaken the bones of a house that had once held her dreams. She moved up the stairs with that same composed gait, trailing her fingers along the polished mahogany handrail she once wiped clean every Sunday afternoon. The master bedroom door was open, and Cynthia stepped inside. The bedding was different, too loud, too shiny. There were clothes tossed carelessly over a chaise she once adored. Lipsticks, flat irons, and a diffuser cluttered the dresser. But the mirror above it remained the same, the one she had chosen at a vintage market in Cape Town. She walked toward the closet and opened it without hesitation. Mary's clothes stared back at her, colorful dresses, fur jackets, and handbags arranged with a kind of pride that didn't belong here. Cynthia didn't flinch. Instead, she looked at the top shelf where a familiar shoebox still sat. She reached for it and opened it. Inside were receipts, original property documents, and 2 small photographs, one of her mother, one of her and Josh in better times. She exhaled deeply but not painfully. There were no tears, just certainty. She walked to the window, pulled the drapes slightly aside, and let the light in. Outside, the garden was overgrown, the hedges in need of a trim. She made a mental note of it. Then she turned and walked down the stairs, not as a guest, but as the rightful owner, reclaiming the soul of her home with every silent step. By the time she left, the staff understood. She didn't raise her voice, didn't fire anyone, didn't even utter Mary's name. She simply walked through, noted what was hers, and reminded the house of her presence. Elsie followed her to the door. "Should we be expecting you again, Ma?" she asked quietly. Cynthia gave her a look that answered more than words ever could. "Very soon," she said, her voice gentle but firm. As she stepped back into her car, she glanced once more at the house. This wasn't about revenge. It never had been. It was about correction, about restoration. Mary had paraded this place as if it were her victory trophy, but she didn't know its story, didn't know the pain, sacrifice, and ambition carved into every wall. Cynthia had poured her soul into this house, and no matter how many selfies Mary took or brunches she hosted, she could never inherit what she hadn't earned. Cynthia wasn't posting sub-tweets. She wasn't calling friends. She was simply moving with intention. And her steps weren't toward a fight. They were toward a reckoning. The house felt the shift. So had the walls, the furniture, and the air. Cynthia didn't need the world to see her walking in. What mattered was that the house saw her. It remembered her. And when the time came, it would open its doors again to the only woman who had ever called it home in truth. Courtroom corridors often carry a strange silence, an awkward blend of anticipation, dread, and unresolved truths. On the morning of the hearing, that silence hung thick in the air as Josh and Mary arrived, their steps slower than usual, their faces strained beneath the makeup and borrowed confidence. Josh wore a navy blue suit slightly too tight at the neck, and Mary had chosen a white dress, an attempt at innocence that didn't quite match her restless eyes. They didn't speak to each other much. Her fingers fidgeted with her bracelet. His eyes scanned the hallway, avoiding the curious stares from the media already gathered outside. Despite their attempts to seem composed, there was no denying the crack in their performance. Cynthia wasn't there yet, but her absence was louder than any presence. The building felt like it leaned toward her, like it waited for her to walk in and settle the weight of the truth once and for all. A few photographers snapped shots as Josh adjusted his tie and tried to smile, but it was a weak, unconvincing thing. Mary's expression shifted between forced smiles and quick flashes of irritation. She whispered to Josh, asking again if everything would be fine. Josh, who once had all the words, had nothing reassuring to say. The silence between them was no longer strategic, it was hollow, empty, and it echoed with every tick of the clock, as they waited for the reckoning Cynthia had promised without ever raising her voice. When Cynthia finally entered the courtroom, the space felt different. She didn't wear anything dramatic, just a sleek black jumpsuit, heels that clicked with purpose, and a soft scarf draped over her shoulders. Her hair was pulled back neatly, her makeup subtle, and her expression unreadable. She didn't look at Mary, she didn't even glance at Josh. Her eyes were fixed ahead, and her presence alone quieted the whispers in the gallery. She sat beside her lawyer, calmly unfolding a set of papers while the judge settled into position. Her attorney, a composed woman named Evelyn Blake, began laying out the case with quiet force, presenting property ownership documents, transaction histories, and timestamps that painted a picture too complete to be denied. The evidence was undeniable. The mansion was still fully under Cynthia Kingsley's name, never transferred, never sold. What had occurred was not a misunderstanding, but a calculated occupancy of a home they had no legal right to reside in. As Evelyn spoke, Mary's lips parted slightly, a flicker of disbelief flashing across her face. Josh leaned back in his chair, arms folded, face stoic, but his eyes betrayed him. They danced nervously across the room, calculating, trying to anticipate what blow might come next. Cynthia remained silent. Her stillness was her weapon. She let the truth do the talking. For every bold video Mary posted, for every lie Josh constructed, there was now a receipt, a signature, a clause, a witness. The courtroom wasn't filled with drama or shouting. It was filled with facts, and nothing silenced deception more than the calm brutality of documented truth. Outside the courtroom, the ripple effect began to spread. The story had reached the ears of a popular gossip blog known for peeling back the veneers of influencer perfection. They ran the headline, "Socialite accused of flaunting stolen mansion. Real owner breaks her silence in court." The post went viral in under an hour. Clips from Mary's past videos were stitched side by side with excerpts from public court filings. Comment sections exploded with disbelief, anger, mockery. Followers who once hailed Mary as a beacon of manifestation began asking uncomfortable questions. Why didn't you show us the deed? You said the woman gave you the house. Where's the apology? Someone followed her. Others demanded accountability. A few even reposted Cynthia's quiet arrival at the courthouse, calling it the real soft life. Mary locked her account temporarily, overwhelmed by the backlash. Josh, for the first time in years, found himself the target of online scrutiny. His past ventures, failed and quietly buried, resurfaced with people accusing him of being a professional leech. The couple who once curated their lives for admiration were now the faces of arrogance and fraud. But Cynthia didn't gloat, she didn't retweet. She didn't issue a public statement. She returned to Willow Creek, finished her tea by the window, and watered her potted plants. Her victory wasn't in likes or trending hashtags. It was in the quiet dismantling of a lie she never needed to shout about. Back in Brindle Heights, the eviction notice came with little warning. Mary had just returned from a tense lunch meeting, where a brand she'd collaborated with for months abruptly cancelled their deal. She was still processing that when the doorbell rang and uniformed officers presented the official documents. The paper trembled in her hands as she read through the notice. Her name wasn't even mentioned. It was all directed to Joshua Walters, and as she scanned the legal jargon, it hit her. She was a guest in a home that had never been hers. Her protests were weak, her voice breaking as she called Josh, who was already packing up essentials from the home office. "You told me she moved on," she cried, her voice shrill. "You said this was ours." Josh didn't respond. He simply zipped up the suitcase and muttered something about needing to speak to his lawyer. That night, Mary tried to go live on her page, hoping to salvage the image. But her eyes were swollen, her words scattered, and her tone defensive. The comments were ruthless. Viewers asked where she'd be filming next. Some just sent laughing emojis. Others sent screenshots of Cynthia's house deed now public. By morning, Mary had deleted her account. The house, once her palace of fantasy, now stood quiet, its doors closed to those who trespassed. Cynthia hadn't slammed the door, she had simply reclaimed it. Not as a statement, not for revenge, just because it was hers. The house stood still that morning, bathed in soft light from the rising sun. The once overgrown garden had been trimmed, the hedges sculpted into clean lines again, and the front porch swept off the dirt and disarray it had accumulated under false tenants. Cynthia arrived alone, driving herself in the same silver sedan she had brought weeks earlier. There was no fanfare, no entourage, no dramatic entrance. She stepped out slowly, exuding a peace that needed no validation. Her outfit was as understated as ever, high-waisted trousers paired with a white button-down shirt, the sleeves casually rolled just below her elbows. She carried no bags, no folders. She had already done the heavy lifting. The keys she held were new, they were the originals. The weight of them in her palm was familiar, grounding. As she unlocked the door and stepped inside, the scent was different now. It no longer smelled like perfume and camera lights. It smelled like lavender and furniture polish again. She closed the door behind her gently, placing the keys on the table in the foyer like one would after a long trip. She didn't speak. She just stood there soaking in the silence. The house was no longer echoing with voices that didn't belong. It was breathing again. Upstairs, the bedroom had been stripped of Mary's clutter. The gaudy bedding had been replaced with a fresh set of Egyptian cotton sheets. Cynthia walked into the room and opened the windows wide. The air drifted in cool and fragrant, lifting the curtains slightly as if the house was stretching after a long sleep. The closet had been cleared. Her things, packed neatly months ago in Willow Creek, had been delivered and arranged exactly as they once were. Shoes on the left, blouses on the right. Her mother's jewelry box placed gently on the vanity, its lid closed but humming with memory. Cynthia took a seat at the edge of the bed. She didn't cry, she didn't smile. She just exhaled, as if finally letting go of something she'd been holding in her chest far too long. This wasn't a victory lap, it wasn't a moment of glory. It was a homecoming. The walls, once blurred by strangers' filters and lies, seemed to settle with her presence, as though they recognized the rhythm of her footsteps. She walked to the mirror and looked at herself, not to admire, not to question, but to meet the woman who had survived it all without a single public scream. She had returned not because she wanted revenge, but because the story was never finished. And no one else had the right to write the ending but her. Later that day, the staff who had remained loyal filtered back in one by one. Elsie arrived first with a quiet knock and a thermos of ginger tea. "I made it how you like it, Ma," she said softly, her voice a mixture of apology and relief. Cynthia smiled, not wide, just enough to acknowledge that she remembered. Then came the gardener, then the security guard. One by one, those who had watched from the sidelines, powerless as the mansion was turned into a circus, came back with gentle steps and silent gratitude. No one spoke of Mary or Josh, no one needed to. Their chapter had closed. Cynthia didn't ask for explanations. She gave instructions calmly, walking through the house with her usual grace, pointing out fixtures to be restored, walls to be repainted, things to be removed. Her tone wasn't harsh, it was certain. She made no mention of what had happened. She simply moved as if nothing had. That was her style, clean, intentional, without unnecessary noise. The kitchen was scrubbed till it gleamed. The chandeliers were polished until they shimmered again. The home wasn't just being cleaned, it was being cleansed. Mary had tried to brand it with vanity, with show. Cynthia was restoring it with essence, with truth. Outside, the neighborhood had already begun whispering again, but this time with reverence. Some peeked through curtains, some watched from balconies, and one by one, cars slowed as they passed the house, drivers lowering their windows just to catch a glimpse of the woman who had reclaimed her space without once raising her voice. There was no press statement, no viral video, no social media monologue. Cynthia didn't need it. Her actions had spoken for her. And in an age where everyone shouted to be heard, her silence was the loudest message of all. Mary had vanished from the digital scene. Her name was quietly replaced on collaboration pages. Josh had disappeared too, his charm no longer enough to shield him from consequence. Cynthia, however, remained still, rooted, not trending, not shouting, just a present. That evening at dusk painted the sky in hues of orange and rose. She stood on the balcony holding a cup of tea, looking out at the same street she had once stood over, wondering if she'd ever return. And now she has, not as a victim, not as a conqueror, but as herself, whole, quiet, unshaken. The house at last was hers again, not just on paper, not just in memory, but in presence, in energy, in peace. We've come to the end of this story. Please subscribe to my channel to support me. Thank you.